baskets collection.
That's correct.
But the Spanish and the Mexican situation was a much different situation. They really did see Native Americans as an animal to use, and and we don't know when exactly this particular activity occurred. We have three different dates here: 1835, 1841, or 1842. Vallejo at his ranch down in Sonoma had a huge crop of wheat that needed to be harvested, so he decided to come up to Lake County with 80 of his fellow ranchers from down there to round up some Native Americans to come and work to harvest this wheat crop. And we actually have the diary of Juan Bojorges, who was with that expedition at the time, and he remembers 80 citizens coming up from Sonoma. They arrived at the south end of a large lake where there was an island village offshore.
There you go.
They went to the island village and exchanged some beads and blankets and talked to the Native Americans there. They had a Native American from Sonoma County with them who spoke a little bit of Pomo. And at that village, they got an interpreter to join them on the rest of their expedition. So he talks about, in his diary, he says they did a 1 day's ride from that village north up the lakeshore until they got to a place offshore from another island village. And if you draw on a map, about a 1 day's ride north of the lower end of the lake, where the village of Coy, the first village was the village of Coy. You draw a 1 day ride on a map, you end up offshore of Rattlesnake Island, which is where the Elim folks were.
So they met the Coy in the Anderson Marsh area, right, possibly, and then
the Coy at the village of Coy, they picked up an interpreter, and the interpreter rode with them up the coast, up the lake shore to Rattlesnake Island. And at Rattlesnake Island, they went over and they didn't really exchange anything. They just asked if the people there were interested in coming down to the ranch to help harvest this crop. And nobody there was interested. So they kept on around the lake about another day's ride, and they were offshore of another island, and they could see a village on the island in the distance, which was Camdot. And it was too far away for them to really get the attention of the people in the village. So they kept riding about a half a day, and it got so rugged along the coastline of the lake that they decided to turn back and go back to the place where they were camping, which was probably Glen Haven. And there were some Thule boats on the shoreline there. So their interpreter and a couple of other ones paddled over to the island, the Camdot village. And the Camdot people paddled back with boats and took the whole entourage over to the island to welcome them, and they asked again the people of Camdot, will you come down and work on the ranch, help us get this crop in? And the people there said, no, we're not interested. And at this point, the 80 ranchers and people from Sonoma were getting a little anxious, and they managed to convince most of the village to go into the dance house. And their Sonoma County Native American leader, who was actually married to Vallejo's sister, ended up stabbing the chief through the chest and killing him. And they blocked off the doorway to the dance house with most of the village inside and set it on fire. The diary of the guy who was part of this expedition actually writes about this, and it says, at the order given, a little more than half of the Indians entered the Temescal, the dance house. The chief came unarmed to Carrillo to ask that the others might enter, and the Indian auxiliaries that were with Vallejo at that time shut the door of the dance house, and Carrillo lanced the chief in the stomach, killing him at once. Then the other Indians that weren't in the dance house took to the water, and the other members of Vallejo's troop followed them in 2 of the rafts, killing with blows those defenseless ones who tried to escape by swimming. And the expedition fired on them, killing some and wounding others. At this time, the ones that were guarding the entrance to the dance house made 4 or 5 breaches and set fire to the grass that was on the floor. Then the interpreter told the people inside if they would come out, nothing would be done to them. But those who were inside said they would rather die by burning than be taken by the soldiers. And their bodies were heard crackling from outside as they burned. So, and that's directly out of the diary of Juan Bohorges.
Now this is Salvador Vallejo.
Salvador Vallejo's group of ranchers.
Mariano's older brother.
Right, his brother.
Yes. Yeah. And this longhouse is ceremonial house, yes. So probably a midden like or
yeah. It's I've actually been on the island at the village site, and where the dance house was located is on a flat level area, and there's actually still ash and charcoal on the ground from this particular event.
There is.
Yes.
Wow.
Oh yeah. The island is privately owned, and the owner is very careful to make sure there's no trespassing and no damage done to the resources out there.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I wanted to ask you something about, a lot of the stories say that a lot of the young men, when they were caught, they were tied to a tree and burnt alive on this tree. One of them, the stories is down there by the Y, going to the hospital and going to Lakeport on Lakeshore. You'll see 2 trees there, 2 big ones. One's falling apart and one's still alive. And one of those trees is one of those, it was in, what's his name? That guy from Ukiah was telling the story, and he told the story about those 2 trees. A young man was tied there and burnt alive. Yeah. I was wondering if those trees would still show the signs of the burnt, were burnt around that time.
It's possible, if you took a core sample and looked at the tree rings, you might actually see a fire scar on part of where the side of the tree that might have burned.
Because every time I hear a story like this, I think about, Marumda and how he created the world and how he told all the creations that God gave, his breath to. They come around this big mountain, and they're going to tell them the responsibilities and how to live here on Earth. And at the end of all the responsibilities for everything that lived, he told the man, I created man all over the world. I created them different colors, different languages. And one day you're going to meet. And when you do, have a big festival and share. Share your food, share your drinks, share your whatever. Share stories, everything. And said nothing about conquering or anything, And so I always think of that story about what Marumda told the human beings, after he created them, what he told them. And this is completely opposite.
Completely opposite. Yeah. As an anthropologist, I have to look at all cultures objectively, and not have any kind of preconceived notions one way or the other, when I'm studying a culture. And when you look at cultures around the world objectively, you find that cultures that don't have agriculture, irrigation agriculture, don't have warfare. They have trade and exchange relationships, they have those kinds of things. They might occasionally have a boundary squabble, but no warfare as we know it. But as soon as you get to development of agriculture, and you've basically ruined your environment and exchanged a whole bunch of variety of plants and foods for just one, then all of a sudden it becomes attractive to another group, and they want to come over and take it over, And I think the Western European idea of conquer and take over was born back when agriculture actually started. And once you get that kind of thing in a culture, then you start getting warfare.
It's a commodity.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a
when you-
commodity-based, it's a resource-based warfare, and
Yeah,
somebody else has done all the work for you. You want to go in
and you're not a balanced society. You're
No.
out of balance, so you got to go take something from
Right.
somebody else who has more of what you want.
exactly.
Yeah.
We also find that in those kinds of societies, kinship is usually reckoned through the male line,
Yeah.
because by reckoning your kinship through the male line, you can quickly get together a whole bunch of men to fight off an attacker.
Yeah.
In cultures where there is no competition like that, you get kinship reckoned through the female line.
You know, matriarchal.
The California
And
Native
then everybody's-
Americans were all matriarchal. And
Yes.
all the kinship was decided through the female line, which indicates that there was really no competition here before the Europeans arrived.
Right.
There was, I mean, sure, there were boundary squabbles. I have this grove of oak trees, you have that grove, But if you asked permission, you were granted permission.
Well, it's affecting our people today because, like, when them families were disenrolling, our families and stuff like that, Well, they disenrolled one lady. Her name is Mildred Goldberg, and her maiden name was Gunther. And her dad was Charles Gunther. And I found one of these a friend of mine gave it to me, an old museum book. And it told about these villages on the north side, all the names and the people that was there. And anyway, it mentioned this Charles Gunther. These three women, the Shikam, the Habenapal, and the Noha, they were deciding who was going to be the chief of the village over there. And they picked this Charles Gunther. All right, and here's this woman's father that was picked as the chief of one of the old villages, and she got disenrolled out of our tribe.
I know. It's,
And that's, man, that is so sad, to me.
it makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the Camdot massacre that isn't really written down or taught in any schools or anything. I mean, we have some actually. Robert Heiser, who was a Berkeley professor, got these diaries and wrote a book about the Bloody Island Massacre, and actually put these diaries in the back of that as an appendix so that people would realize the Bloody Island Massacre was not the first one in Lake County.
Indeed.
And,
And I think it's imperative for everybody to understand that massacre was the parlance of the day. That when you dealt with Indians and natives or Redskins or whatever the term they were using, that was what they were inferring, was
Right.
that you would go and clean them out.
Yeah, at one point, Governor Burnett of California actually said that there would be a continued extermination of Native Americans.
Well, I was going to get to that later, but it's a fascinating. Well, so let's tip off on that, because at the time that Salvador is coming through, this is pure power on power. This is just dominance and frustration, and so they murder these people in a longhouse. But he comes back not too long later with a big herd of cattle, does he not? Salvador Vallejo, and this is what sets up how we get our lovely Kelsey and Stone in our county.
Right, he decides to bring cattle. Well, he claims to actually have a Mexican land grant that includes the Clear Lake Basin. It turns out that once California became part of the United States, and he tried to prove that land grant, it turns out that the document was forged, and for some strange reason, the actual signature part of the document had been ripped off. So,
Convenient.
Yeah. So he didn't really actually have a Mexican land grant that included the Clear Lake Basin, even though there's a lot of reports and documents that indicate that he did. But he did use it. He brought cattle up here. He established a ranch near where Kelseyville is, and had some stock pens, and actually hired Native Americans from the local village to be vaqueros on that ranch. And we don't really know how many cattle were here, but apparently from the descriptions, the whole lake basin was basically a herd of cattle and horses that belonged to him.
Thousands and thousands.
Thousands.
Yeah. So meanwhile, in and I was kind of joking, but in the early 1800s, America is this family, the Kelseys, and they're born out of the Indian frontier wars and all of the post-revolutionary policies that were happening in Kentucky and in what was then the West, which hadn't even reached the Mississippi yet. So we have that family being born out of that culture, and then they leave Kentucky. They become part of the group that is the first set of pioneers, right? Were they? Is it fair to assume that they were trying to establish themselves in those groups that were getting free lots of land by the government?
Yeah, in fact, that's what they were doing back in Missouri. The Kelsey brothers, the Kelsey family, the Kelsey brothers were born in the 1820s and 30s, and in 1838, Sam Kelsey Jr. was indicted for assault with intent to kill by the state of Missouri after defrauding on his first court date. And they were indicted for the preemption of land claims. So what happens is people are trying to petition the U.S. government for land parcels, and the Kelsey brothers were kind of shystering in.
So it's important to point out that is a consistent theme across the story,
right,
is that the Kelseys
they were preempting land claims of neighbors in Missouri and were invited to leave from Hoffman Bend, Missouri, so they moved upriver and got in the same trouble up there. In 1840, that was 1830. 1841, Andrew Kelsey and Charles Beale were sued for trying to secure preemptive land rights in Henry County, Missouri. And this was how they were trying to make their living. And
right.
And that Sam Kelsey, I hear a lot of stories. This book I have right here, it actually is a master's thesis.
Mm-hmm.
This one lady gave it to me about the Mendocino natives over there.
Excellent.
And it has Sam Kelsey's name in there a lot.
After they left here with Bloody Island, they ended up all over the Napa Valley, and then they escaped. Well, they didn't escape jail. They were let out on parole,
right.
And then they moved up to Humboldt County and continued their craziness up there.
Yeah. And then Ben and his wife ended up in Mexico. We'll get to some of that.
That's kind of the end of the story. But yeah,
they come across, though. I think the moral base. One of the challenges I had with trying to wrap my head around this story is it's so terrible that how can you? It's hard for me to conceive of a person who can see other human beings in that way. And I was really trying to, what is the mindset? You got to. Just to hold on, Clayton. Before I let you go, I just want to say, it is Andrew Jackson's America at that time, and just to draw analogies to today, if the president back then is a known Indian killer, then you can imagine what the culture must have been like.
Right.
And so we raised this killer to our highest office, right. And it's a reflection on the culture. And I just wanted to point that out as we're looking at who we're about to nominate for our own presidency. Right. So folks, it's trouble. We're going to get into some troubling and possibly graphic material here, but I share your challenge in understanding how these people could be so horrendous. But you got to remember they come from a horrendous America at that time.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say is, thinking the native people as being the same as the animals and the plants and the trees. It was really a respective thing, you know what I mean? But they didn't have no respect for the animals and the trees, and So, but that's the way the people thought, I mean, we're made out of this. We're 80% water, and here this is our lake right here. So how many thousands of years we had to, exchange water here, with this lake. And all the animals we ate, and then we die, and then we fertilize the land, or however, we were burnt. And, so it's just like a cycle, helping each other survive. And, but man, thought he's more superior or
Right.
something.
Yeah. The Western European culture saw those resources as something to exploit. And it's, if you think about hunting, if you're a traditional Native American person and you go out hunting, when you're on a hunt, it's up to the animal to present itself to you. It's not, you're not out there to conquer the animal kingdom. It's up to the animal to present itself to you, which is a totally different concept of hunting than what Western Europeans think of. Western Europeans see these resources as something to
dominion.
Right. Yeah.
Dominion.
They're not part of it. It's something for them just to use and discard.
Well, you become them and they become you, and it's like you're the same.
Right. Yeah. It's a totally different way of looking at the world.
Right. So the Kelseys head out into at that time the frontier.
Yeah.
The very edges of. It's not even colonies at that point, really.
No, they in 1841 they join up with the Bidwell-Bartleson wagon train to California, which was one of the very first wagon trains to actually go across the desert and over the Sierras, and and it was actually Kelsey's wife was the first woman, apparently, Nancy Kelsey, to cross that route. Everyone else was taking the route up through Oregon and then coming down, which was a much nicer, easier route if you were going to wagon train to California. But these guys were in a hurry and wanted to come straight across, so they did it. That it was trying. They lost. When you get out in that desert, there's very little gas. There are few gas stations. And if you're thinking about those days, your vehicle were those big bulls that were hauling your wagon, and those big pack animals need a lot of grass, which is their form of gas, to keep going. Well, you get out in that desert, there isn't enough grass to maintain their life. So the first thing that happened is they lost their big bulls. They had to give up their wagons because they didn't have anything to haul their wagons, and so they come across about half of the way on foot.
Well, and plus, I mean, all the writings that these Europeans were writing about Indians out there in the West, they're savage, they're going to eat you alive, and so all these people coming in these wagon trains were scared, really scared of Indians, and if you read that Murder State book, it'll share in there with you that nobody got hurt.
Yeah, it's true. And there's a little story about their wagon train going across, and actually they had to abandon their wagons at a place called Owl Springs. And there was a story where one of the Kelseys had wandered off to go hunt something, and came across a group of Native Americans that were also out hunting. And this guy was so scared of the Indians because of all these crazy stories he's heard back east, that he's taking off his clothes and throwing them and running around trying to, and he actually hurts himself. The Native Americans that were out hunting pick him up and bring him back to the wagon train and said, you guys better keep closer track of this guy.
This one's not right.
So they actually save his ass and bring him back to the wagon train and say, keep on moving. And there was no animosity at all, but the members of the wagon train had heard all these stories. Oh my goodness, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
They lost the ox, and this guy went to go looking for his ox, and he gets in this like a bunch of like a little cavern or whatever, but there's rocks all around him, and then the sun was kind of shining, going down. He's seen all these shadows, and they all turned into Indians. Man, he went screaming back to the wagon train. They came out with their guns, and he went over there, and they looked all around, couldn't see no footprints or nothing. And it was nothing but those rocks, and they got their ox back and everything. But it was just, they were scared, Yeah.
So it takes about 6 months for them to get all the way here from Missouri.
Right.
And when they get here, they have some historical run-ins, don't they?
They're arrested.
Yeah.
They're arrested because they're in Mexico.
They're in Mexico
And they don't have
without
passports.
papers.
So, there wasn't a wall then.
That's right. They put a wall up on Tahoe.
Yeah, it was. So in order to remain in the territory, they needed passports from the Mexican government. And Mariano Vallejo, Salvador's brother, refused and jailed all of the members of the wagon train until John Marsh vouched for them. And in December, the Kelseys traveled with Bidwell up the Sacramento River to Sutter's Fort.
Yeah, and if they weren't with Bidwell, then they would be nowhere. They'd
Right.
probably still be they probably might have been sent back or become transients in San Francisco.
So yeah, they finally,
because,
Sutter vouches for them, and
Marsh didn't know these people. He didn't know. This was straight up John Bidwell and Barson and their connections. Yeah.
to get an idea of Sutter, everybody learns in school Sutter's Mill, the gold discovery, and Sutter's Fort. You go to Sacramento and you can visit the museum. But very few people are aware that Sutter had 600 to 800 Native Americans. And in James Clayton in 1846 visited Sutter's place in Sacramento and says that these 600 to 800 Indians were in a complete state of slavery. He feeds them 10 to 15 troughs, 3 to 4 feet long, like so many hogs, and they must eat with their hands. So that's how Sutter treated his Native Americans.
Yeah, and we're in 1845,
1846.
Yeah, so folks, that means within 10 years from that date, you have institutionalized slavery in the state of California. It's actually in our Constitution calling out for the collection of Native Americans across the state.
Right.
And
the Native American Indenture Act.
Yeah, the Indenture Act. That's right.
Plus, he had a harem of 9, 10, and 11-year-old teen girls.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that. That part of the story is really difficult too. But yes, it is fair to say that they were using them for all purposes, right? Mm-hmm. Disgusting.
When was the Indenture Act repealed?
I have no idea.
It's still law.
Still in effect.
It just came within a couple of votes of being required that all Native Americans become slaves or indentured servants. But as it was made. It wasn't required. It was voluntary. But that presented a whole bunch of other problems, which we can talk about later too.
So the Kelseys are here in California. It's 1846. The Vallejos are well established in Sonoma and wealthy, right?
Yeah,
doing really well. And but at this time also he had left his cattle. He abandoned Salvador Vallejo abandons his herd here, and there's a bit of celebration, so to speak, not necessarily out and out, but there's ample food, and the Pomo in the county generally take over the care and feeding of the herd at that point. Right?
Yeah, he had already started moving most of the cattle out of the Lake Basin before the Camdot massacre, and the Camdot massacre basically closed the gate on Vallejo, and he was no longer a welcome person in the Clear Lake Basin after that.
And he never returned.
Never returned, right? Yeah, but he had already moved a lot of his herds out. The only ones that he hadn't moved out were the ones that had kind of gone wild up in the hills. But because he had left and taken his cattle with him, the Native American community believed that all the cattle that were left, he left for them. So they were theirs for the taking if they were interested.
And so around that time too, then the Bear Flag Revolt occurs. Is that correct?
Right.
Around 1846. And so these cats, the Kelseys get arrested, and they get a reprieve from John Marsh, but they have to go up to Sutter's Fort.
Right.
They spend some time at Sutter's Fort as captives, which we all know is more like staying at.
Right. They were just it was like the hotel.
Federal prison. They ate well. They were served well. They probably slept indoors, or at least in sheltered buildings. And
Vallejo was arrested at his ranch in Sonoma And the Bear Flag guys decided, well, what are we going to do with this guy? And I mean, they were all buddies. He invited them in. They had dinner.
They served
and wine.
drinks.
Right? Yeah. And oh, by the way, we're taking over, and you're no longer
Classic
so,
California.
So yeah, they took him then over to
Sutter?
Sutter's place, right?
Yeah.
And so Vallejo's no longer in charge, and it's now part of the United States. Or actually its own country. I think the Bear Flag Revolt.
Yes.
California wasn't part of the United States.
Well, and having read some other history, there's arguments going up and down the coast all the way into San Diego about who's going to take over, what general in the Union Army is appropriate for the annexation, all these things.
Yeah.
And then
So yeah, it was not a heavily battled thing. It was hi, we're taking over. You're under arrest. Come and stay at the fort with us.
Yes, you gentlemen look tired. Would you like to come in?
So Vallejo starts to look around for someone to sell his holdings to in Lake County, and he's hoping that he can talk Governor William Boggs, into buying his property, but Vallejo's not interested. And then there's these.
No, Boggs is the governor of a state back east, right?
Well, yeah, Boggs. I don't know. Was he the first governor of California?
I read he was he was the governor of California and Oregon when they were kind of together.
Oh,
When it was still
Before, yeah.
at this point, he's just William Boggs.
Yeah.
William Boggs.
Just this
Bill-
character,
right.
Bill Boggs running around.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, we're talking about a lot of these names, and these Indian people carry a lot of these names, like Boggs,
absolutely.
and Frazier, and
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mine's Duncan.
So, 1847, Vallejo's happy to sell off his remaining wild stock at Clear Lake to this fellow by the name of Charles Stone and Mr. Sherland and Andy and Ben Kelsey. So we have some estimates. The number of head of cattle anywhere from 800 to 1,500 and up to 2,500 horses. We don't really know, but they were the ones that were in the hills that Vallejo couldn't easily round up and get back down to Sonoma.
So Enright,
Kelsey and Charles Stone.
Andy Kelsey and Charles Stone, and they probably most likely would have first settled around that longhouse out Vallejo's
Vallejo's original
outbuilding.
ranch house and corrals is probably where they started out. They ended up talking the local village of Native Americans into building a 40-foot long 2-room adobe next to Kelsey Creek.
Clayton, do you know about the traditional sites out there?
Yeah, that was Habenapo and Halanapo,
And
2 village sites.
now, are those village sites traditionally kind of where the bridge is now?
Where Chelsea is,
Where
Chelsea, yeah.
Creek is,
Yeah.
kind of that bend.
Mm-hmm. And these villages, when you think of a village, like an Indian village, it's only maybe 20, 30, 40 acres, But then it was 100, 200,000 acres of land that they used, and agriculture was the wild food. And, they not only tended to the wild by burning, pruning, and all that, but they also took the seeds and planted more, so there could be more food. And they had flat family planning, I mean, they just didn't have a whole bunch of kids.
No.
Yeah.
It was detrimental.
Yeah, survival. Yeah.
Yeah, that book that you're reading, Tending the Wild,
Mm-hmm.
is a real good book. I mean, it talks about the 3,000 different plants and animals that the community depended on.
Yeah.
And the Habenapo and the Hulanapo had large tribal territories that were distinct tribal territories, and then those villages were like the political centers of that tribal territory. There might be several villages within the territory.
Mm-hmm. And also, can you guys discuss about how rich? Just the Cobb Mountain complex alone, I understand, has been traditionally shared by 4 or 5 different tribes. Cobb Mountain at the time
the Europeans arrived, we have ethnographers from UC Berkeley came up in the late 1800s and up until about 1930 and interviewed a lot of elders around the lake to get an idea of where the boundaries were of the various tribal groups. And it turns out that Cobb Mountain was like the center of spokes that radiated out, that separated the Wapo people of Middletown, the Hulanapo, the Khoi, the Lake Miwok, and three different language groups and 5 different dialects boundaries all converged on Cobb Mountain, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, very neat. And Clayton, I haven't told you any of this, but I work with a lot of the hitch work that's being done with Scotts Valley, Band of Pomo, and also Robinson and Big Valley and all the other groups. And so, we're looking at hitch restoration, but my studies show that, the hitch were a #1 protein source for the Clear Lake people. And we're talking, they were so abundant that children, during the harvest and the spawns would just pick them up with their hands and help.
We did that in the 50s. In the 50s, they were running through old Robinson, through the on the road. He was in the road, man.
They were in the road,
in the ditches, and hundreds, thousands there were, and. We didn't, I didn't know, nobody really told me, but we used to go over there and kill like hundreds at a time, and put them in the tub. And a long time ago, they would dry these fish, and then that was winter fish.
Yep.
And, and then they would warm it up and then, pick on it and eat it.
Yeah.
Bones and all, I guess.
Yeah, bones and all. And no, the hitch, for the folks in listening, are about 6 to 7 inches long when they're adults, and they're a minnow.
Yeah, there are species of minnow. I think there were about 6 different minnow species that lived in the lake.
That's right, and they were isolated here during a geological event, which included the mountain, I believe. There was a sloughing off. Anyways, it closed off the lake from the Russian River basin.
About 12,000 years ago.
Yeah, and pushed water back east towards the Cache Creek River basin. So during that change, these hitch, they're called Lavinia exelicauda chai, are the traditional food source for the Pomo, and are currently there are many grants and environmental programs trying to save these fish. They are currently threatened and under the state of California, and could quickly move to the endangered species list.
When I think of food like that, and when Marun was telling these people what they had to share and telling the animals what they had to share, they have a story about the bear, sharing his food, and the people said, "We'll share this food with you, the berries and all that, and for that we'll honor you with the dance and with the bear dance and with we'll honor you like that and sing songs about you." And they said, "Well, what you going to do for us, bear?" And the bear says, "I won't eat you." He said. But the chai, they're not only for people, but they were for the eagles, for the red-tailed hawks, and for all these birds that ate, that ate this fish, and then we ate the birds, and we all just shared each other's food and each other,
Yeah, and if you've been lucky enough lately, there's been a couple bald eagles out in the county. I've seen them down the 29, and also a couple brown eagles, and the birds are out on the lake, and the fish are jumping on the water, and the water's full again up to the clear shores. It looks really beautiful out there. It's really pleasant. But but weren't the people, the Pomo people were also vacationing up in the mountains, because it would get hot down here, so they would head up into the geysers and up into the springs and the running waters of the mountains.
I told a story at this Gona, at the gathering of Native Americans they had here a couple weeks ago at Robinson, and it's like 60, 70 kids, Indian kids from all the rancherias around here. And anyway, I got up and told the Bloody Island story, and told about the water and all that, and how we're 80% water and how we have to respect and all that. And after, I felt alone trying to tell the story about Bloody Island. I felt alone, I'm the only Indian out there trying to, shout at the top of my lungs about what happened here and all. But when I seen the prayer shell going around, and Darren, the young man, was singing the song, well, after I told my story, he got up and told a story about these families went to the ocean, they came back, and they came back to Bloody Island and seeing all the devastation, and I never heard that one before. But it came out of this young man, and then I didn't feel alone anymore when I seen that shell go around to these kids, and then the prayers were, it's just like tears that coming out of my eyes, seeing all of these kids, man, listening, and just like, whoa, it's right on.
Yeah. So that's actually a pretty good place to stop, gentlemen. Let's call it 1848.
Yep.
Is that about right?
Just about right.
And we'll be picking up this tale on April 25th. Will be the second installment. We'll be discussing the actual inhabitation in Kelseyville by Stone and Kelsey, and the really difficult to track intricate events that surround the actual murders and the day of the murders, and then we'll finalize with in May, on May 9th, the week of the Bloody Island celebration. We'll be finalizing with the story of Bloody Island itself. We have just one call. Okay, caller, here we go. Oh, are you there? We're gonna try you. Hold on, here we go. All right, caller one with the last minute call.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Miloš. I'm just wondering if there was a place for having a discussion on these various subjects. I love the questions, and I have to say, in stories you present, there are lots of big holes, which I, not knowing much about things here, cannot dispute that you're saying, but it seems like it's a goulash of things put together. And it may not be representative of the situation. Would you agree with me that if someone differentiates human beings based on their ethnicity is a racist?
Well, we're going to have to get into that in the next show, Miloš.
Go to the library. Go to the library.
But call us earlier next time so we can start.
Well, if there is a place for discussion like this, I will, if I'm here.
Okay, great.
I just wish, it will be real. It will be real, helping people. I'm all for changing the name of Kelseyville. I have no. I would march with you in a street, but that's about where it goes.
Well, we're going to get into that as well. Thank you, Miloš, for calling. Thank you, callers. We're going to open up the lines a little earlier on our next show. Thank you, Dr. Parker. Thank you, Clayton Duncan. Thank you, Francis, my buddy, my sidekick. Okay,
Right on.
have a wonderful day. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
88.1.